Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. Each week we talk about heart rate variability and how it can be used to improve your overall health and wellness. Please consider the information in this podcast for your informational use and not medical advice. Please see your medical provider to apply any of the strategies outlined in this episode. Heart Rate Variability Podcast is a production of Optimal LLC and Optimal HRV. Check us out at optimalhrv.com. Please enjoy the show. Welcome, friends, to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. I am Matt Bennett. I am here with my good friend, Dr. Janell Mensinger. My friend Janell, I am so excited to finally have this episode with you. We did a presentation on this, and I've been bugging you about this probably for about a year or 18 months to do this episode. So in this episode, we're going to, if we can have a little fun with it, BMI versus HRV as a metric for health and wellness. So we're going to go cage match style with these two. But I would love, first of all, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because we've talked a lot about this over the years. Obviously, getting our presentation, delivering a presentation on this was a huge honor to do that with you. So I would love to start out. Let's talk about the body mass index, because this thing is everywhere, and I've been sharing a lot with you. I see people say this is bad, and then they use it to make their point. So I've got some thoughts on it, but I want to start with you. If we're going to make an argument against the BMI, what would be some of the points we make to say maybe we should not be using this for a diagnosing people to, as a wellness metric? What would some of your things to say, maybe we could do better than the BMI?
Wow. So first, I just want to put out there, this is a really loaded issue. And Matt, I have to say thank you for pointing out the very obvious technique that I think we all do. We all engage in this almost double speak about the BMI. We say the BMI, the body mass index, is a bad metric, as it doesn't represent health and well-being very well, or if at all. And yet, to prove our point, we turn to the BMI.
Yeah.
So thank you again for turning my attention to the hypocrisy that we all engage in, myself included.
Well,
so,
and I would give you a little bit of grace on that, my friend, and everybody else. Is there not necessarily been a replacement metric? So it's like, if you take that away, what research can you really start to talk about? Which is why I like this discussion as maybe a path forward away from a metric that no one seems to think is worth measuring, and yet everybody uses it if they have a point to make.
This is true, right? So I mean, I think the most important place to start in terms of deconstructing the BMI is just the data, right? The data show us that the BMI misses so many health problems, right? If we were just to use the BMI as a marker of good health, bad health, we are missing the boat entirely. And there's been a number of articles that have shown this. Jeff Hunger, Janet Tomiyama, and colleagues produced a paper. It's probably not new anymore in most people's eyes, but I think it was 2016 maybe by now, that showed, and it was a replication study that showed the percentage of people who we can identify as in some sort of cardiovascular risk profile is just very poorly represented by the BMI. So if we say, okay, people who have a BMI between 18.5 and 24 4.9, which is in the CDC's, categorization, the quote unquote healthy body mass index, then we are missing a very large portion of people in that category who have cardiovascular risk factors. Then similarly, when we look at those individuals who are in the higher risk categories by the BMI, so what they call the overweight group, which as we've discussed in our workshop, is not a good even name or label, right?
Yeah.
For this category, because the thing that we always think about in my field, and I come from the field of eating disorders, is over what weight, right? Like what's the weight that you're supposed to be at? There is no good singular weight. So when we say overweight, it's just a bad label. And then of course the terminology that we use for a BMI over 30 being obese is just a terrible use of a label because of the dictionary definition of obese, meaning literally to eat oneself to death. So this is a problem in and of itself, the labeling, right? So even taking aside the labels, which is a whole topic in and of itself, to be honest, and some of my PhD students, Molly Robbins and Katerina Rinaldi, are doing an analysis as we speak under my colleague Dr. Paula Brochu, under our advisement, doing some studies to look at the labeling, the words that we use to label these categories. Words aside, the categories themselves, even if we did have good labels, don't represent the health status of the people who fall into those categories based on height and weight ratio, because that's all that the BMI is, right?
Yeah.
It's a ratio of somebody's height to their weight. And if we say that a person with a BMI 25 and over is at higher risk, we should indeed be capturing most of the people who have a lot of cardiovascular risk. And we are actually miscategorizing them. There's something like a third of the people in that category who do not have any cardiovascular risk. And I think the thing that taught me this lesson the most was that a while ago, I did a randomized controlled trial to test how well we could promote health for, I was looking at women in particular, for women with a BMI over 30. So I kind of got myself into the trouble spot that you're describing. Like I'm saying, let's get rid of the BMI, yet let's use the BMI to qualify people to be in this study, right?
Yeah.
So I was in a stuck position, right? Like I'm working in the paradigm that everyone else is. I have no other way to determine, at least in my head, in my naive head, right? No other way to determine how to get people into this study. So I use the BMI. I tell myself and everybody in the grant that I wrote this, or the grant application that I was writing for, like the BMI doesn't work, but let's use the BMI to get people into my study. Well, I made the very false assumption in that recruitment process that, and this shows my naivete, this shows how little I got at that point. I made the assumption that I was going to get people who had cardiovascular risk into my study just by cutting off the BMI and saying, if you have a BMI over 30, you're in my study. And I'm going to show that we don't need to reduce your BMI to reduce your cardiovascular risk. Do you see the problem that I've created for myself? If I'm already saying that a lot of people with high BMI don't have cardiovascular risk factors, yet I'm trying to use the BMI to recruit women into my randomized control trial to help them improve their cardiovascular risk factors, I've created a big conundrum for myself.
Yeah.
Right? And that's exactly what happened. So a lot of the 80 women that I recruited into that trial did not have cardiovascular risk. So when I tried to reduce their cardiovascular risk by either half of them were randomized to be in a behavioral weight loss program, and the other half of them were randomized to be in a size acceptance, health at every size program. My hope was that, or my hypothesis was that people would actually be able to reduce their risk in either situation, that you didn't have to necessarily lose weight to improve your health cardiovascularly. You could actually accept your size and engage in health promoting behaviors and do nothing about your weight, and you would still get benefit, cardiovascular, biometric benefit.
Yeah.
Well, there was a fatal flaw to that logic, that there were so few people, because these were relatively young people. They were between the ages of 30 and 45. So few people actually had the cardiovascular risk in the first place. We couldn't statistically reduce something that wasn't there. So I backed myself into that corner, and I think we continue to do that. We continue to make these errors, these logical errors, by using the BMI as a health metric. It's just bad science. We have so much data, population data, to show mortality is similarly flawed based on the BMI. We don't have much evidence to suggest that if you have a higher BMI, you're going to die more quickly or earlier. Your longevity will be negatively impacted. In fact, we have a very clear U-shaped distribution on that. So the long and short of the problem is that we just have to stop using it. We can't be saying this is a bad metric and then still do our science based on this metric.
Yeah. And that's diving into this world with you. And you've been a great mentor for me. It's just interesting to see a field struggling so much because, like you said, like a lot of these books, a lot of these articles, like what do you use if you don't use BMI? And so as I dive into also the history of BMI, it's a pretty dark,
It's a dark
scary
history.
capitalism, racism. The person who discovered it, I believe, said you're all
Don't use
using
it.
this. This was never
No,
designed
no,
for this.
it was called the Quetelet Index. Quetelet was a statistician, I believe astronomer, a European, I forget what country, to be frank, but Quetelet, maybe I'm not even saying his last name correctly because I think there's a French component in there. It looks like Quetelet, but I don't think we can pronounce the T. But yeah, absolutely. He never meant for this to be a metric that represented health. Never. And,
Right.
and this is where we are in 2024. It is mind-boggling
Yeah.
to think about scientists still using, and medicine. I think the biggest problem here is how integrated
Yeah.
the metric is to the medical industrial complex, the healthcare system, the healthcare industry, the health insurance industry. The BMI has found its way all the way into these systems, these
Yeah.
portals, right? It pops out of your record because it's been built that way.
Right.
And to
Yep.
unbuild it is really what we're struggling with. So,
And talking to medical providers at the conference is part of their electronic medical records. So
precisely.
establishing getting BMI is part of medical care, even though that there's really no research to support that is any sort of vital sign that
That's useful.
should determine the course of care if I'm putting the pieces together correctly.
Correct. Right. So this is not a useful metric, and it shows up on every person's healthcare record.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work to do in medicine and healthcare to undo that. And I have to give you the credit, Matt, for introducing me, I mean, at least to the idea of the HRV, because it was your book that I read a number of years ago now. I think it was your original edition of the book, HRV. What is it called? It's somewhere on,
Heart
it's
rate
not
variability.
heart rate variability.
Yep.
That's it, right? Yeah, here it is. It's the skinnier one right here.
Yep. The
Yeah.
skinny one with the bad subtitle.
So now you've got an expanded version, which
Yeah.
which I also have, that includes heart rate variability biofeedback, I think is
Yeah.
kind of the
Yes.
name
Yeah.
edition. But it was your book that really, I mean, I had heard of HRV in some of my work as a health psychologist and doing work in the field of eating disorders and weight stigma. I was looking at HRV as a potential stress marker, right?
Mhm.
HRV reactivity, in fact, was something I came across maybe about 8 years ago. I was putting together a research application to look at the stress that people who are in larger bodies, so people with a higher BMI, right?
Yeah.
The stress that they were experiencing in a healthcare encounter. A lot of my research has considered healthcare stress, and the idea that people in larger bodies will often avoid healthcare
Yeah.
because of the fact that their BMI is being measured in these
Yeah.
appointments.
Yeah.
And it's often a lot of assumptions, right? Go into that discussion around that metric popping up on the chart.
Yeah.
And so when I was really kind of embedded in that work on weight stigma, I started looking at the stress markers of experiencing a healthcare encounter as a person in a larger body. And one of them that came across my eyes in the research was this HRV reactivity. So HRV I understood as something that responded quite quickly to stress, right?
Mhm.
And so that's when I started to learn a little bit about HRV. But no, I didn't really think about this as a biomarker or a biometric in the same kind of way that we could think about BMI as being used as a biometric until I read your book. And I have to say, that is when the wheels started turning for me, that, wait a second, why are we saying, well, we're using the BMI because it's easy, right? Like we
Yeah.
can step on a scale, anybody gets, anybody has a scale in their house, right? It's a very low barrier type of a device, if you will, right? Anybody can step on the scale and get a number, right? Well, today, why not say, well, if we need something, let's put
Yeah.
that caveat out there, right? If you
Yeah.
really need a number that represents how you're doing in that day, in that moment, we now have technology that can provide you a number just as simple as it is to step on a scale. Okay, maybe
Yes.
a little bit more complicated, because a scale you can step on in 1 second,
You're
right?
right.
The HRV, though, with a simple app on the phone and a very inexpensive, I'll call it the price of a scale, a
Yeah.
very inexpensive heart rate monitor, you can capture that number in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So we are
Exactly.
talking about 2 minutes and 59 seconds longer. So it is a little bit more complicated, but I'm willing to give up 2 minutes and 59 seconds a day
Yeah.
to know something about my body,
Yes.
if
To
I'm
get that
interested
right.
in that, right?
Right.
If I want to
Absolutely.
know something about how I'm doing today, I am willing to give up 2 minutes and 59 seconds beyond what it would take me to grab a scale and step on that
Yeah.
tool.
And so let me ask you, because I think the one counterpunch BMI has in our cage match here, or at least I thought it had, I've since educated, you've helped me educate myself, is the tricky thing that I was trying to figure out, the relationship between kind of fat and heart rate variability. Was I was looking at fat as a potential stressor. We all have fat. Fat's not good. or bad. I think in the literature, fat is a little bit more complex than that too. If it's around the organs, that can be more detrimental. Learned a lot about people who we would look at and call thin are diabetic because of the some of the fat makeup that they have, or how lifestyle stuff that we can't use that. But that was the thing, is like, well, this is a stress on the autonomic nervous system, and since that has gone away, that's been my professional development, is really like, okay, I my brain works, that you can't tell me it doesn't work. I need to read the research, and it doesn't work. It
It's
just
not a
doesn't
good
work in
marker.
that way. So
Right.
I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think that's the last like thing we hold on to. Well, we know that, or we think is fat equals diabetes, or fat equals heart disease, or fat equals this, that, or the other. And we get in this mentality as fat is bad. And we need to get out of that mentality.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nuanced and it's complicated. And we also have to remember that we all need fat,
Yeah.
right? We need fat on our bodies to function, in our bodies to function.
And it can
And
be a
so
resiliency factor if you
it
come
absolutely,
down. I
it
think this is one of the reasons these colds I get destroy me. I don't have those reserves to get it out.
right,
The interesting science around the resiliency factor
of
of,
having fat and having abundance of fat, right?
yes,
Think about when like in generations and generations ago, the people who were wealthiest were
yeah,
the fattest,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Fatness was a factor that was associated with having a lot,
yeah,
right? Being wealthy, being like it was all backwards in terms of where we are today and where we were many, many generations
yeah.
ago. And what I think has maybe complicated things is that we have almost forgotten about the usefulness
Yeah,
of fatness,
yeah,
right? Usefulness. We've instead associated only the sociocultural idealization of how people look, and having this idealization of leanness in terms of what's good and what's bad on the
hmm,
body, right? And it's just a lot more complicated than that. Fatness can be good. It's but I don't even want to talk about it as good or bad. I think
right,
that's part of our problem, is that good, bad, these are moral statements.
right,
And there's nothing moral, or in my view, we should,
great
and I
point.
hate to even use the word should, but attaching moral terms to the body is not useful,
Yeah,
right? We need to sort of disconnect morality from all of this,
yeah,
because a person's body is who they are. It's part of their identity,
yeah,
and attaching moral words to it is just not a useful place to go psychologically. So, or health wise and medical wise, right?
right,
Why are we attaching good, bad to any of this?
yeah,
So I think in terms of sort of deconstructing fat, I almost just want to like set that aside,
yeah,
right? Because let's not talk about it in any way as good or bad. It just is.
yeah,
That is there. Some people have a lot of fat and some people have less fat, and that's all just there, right? You are given a body when you're born because of so many different factors, right? Genetic and environmental, and so many different things relate to the body that you are born into. And some bodies are going to be larger, and some bodies are going to be smaller, and some bodies are going to be large with little fat, and some bodies are going to be small with lots of fat.
yeah, yeah,
So I think this whole sort of linearity or assumption that small means little fat and large means lots of fat, A, is flawed, right? And then the linearity of more fat is bad and less fat is good is flawed. The linearity of everything here is just flawed. When we see this in these analyses, these epidemiological analyses of mortality and the BMI, right? These are not linear relationships. They are cute. I mean, they're U-shaped distributions, like we were saying. So I think discussing fat and whether or not we need it is almost like a moot point, because we need fat. Like we need fat for our bodies to function. That's not in question. How much do we need? Why do we need to talk about that? Because we can't control very directly how much fat our body has. In fact, as we age, right? As women particularly age, as we reach menopause, our body will start to accumulate a lot more fat because of the hormonal shifts the body is going through. And that is natural. That is normal. And what I think we are doing as a society that is a disservice to everyone is to stigmatize that and to take the sort of normative sort of process or natural process that is happening for women and for people in general as they age in fact. So, I'm not sure how to scientifically talk about fatness, because I don't think that's where the conversation is most readily helpful.
Maybe we do it like, if you think about like just a thought that as you were talking, I'm 6'7". Okay. Right. Like, okay. Like that's are there certain things? Do I hit my head more than you do? Probably. Right. So there are some health risks of being 6'7". I can also,
right. You may have more likelihood of head injury.
Right.
Have we ever, right?
Right. So I hit my head more. It's all scarred up over there, right? But I can see at concerts, which could be a safety thing. So it's like to me, what I'm hearing is like, okay, Matt's 6'7". Does 6'7", does that impact Matt in any way? Yeah, it may hit his head a little bit more, but we're not going to judge Matt for being 6'7". It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's Matt, and approaching it from that neutral thing. I really appreciate your the last things you just said, because I think I've been so in the mainstream culture is certain amounts of fat are bad. And so I think I'm in the place of, no, we need to say it's neutral. I think that's in some ways, it's like, okay, it's there. Let's move on. Like, let's move on. If somebody wants to personally have less of it or more of it, oh, okay. I mean, we don't take away that from somebody, but it's.
I wouldn't put like, and this is just my view, that wanting more fat or wanting less fat is not really a thing in someone's direct control. And I don't think in our culture, I don't think you will I think you'd be very hard pressed to find somebody who would say, yes, I'm signing up for more fat, right? I think that it's a pretty safe assumption that nobody, I don't care from what kind of perspective they live in this particular topic, nobody is signing up for more, because of the way our culture has demonized fat as a moral failing. Like, we are so embedded in that socio-cultural morality kind of domain that I think we're pretty safe to say that nobody's signing up for that. And it's not about like, oh, people need to have the ability to want one way or the other way. I think what's important is that our bodies are just our bodies, and we can engage in health promoting behaviors regardless of the fat on our bodies, and do it in a way that's going to enhance our well-being. That's sort of where I'm coming from here. Not like, let people be fat if they want to be fat, or let people be thin if they want to be thin. It's not really there. Like the choice, the control is, I think we have lots of research. I mean, we're going back into, I mean, maybe this isn't that long, but into the 60s, where we've been trying to help people control their size. We've been looking at diets as far back. I mean, I think Mickey Stunker's work dated into the 50s. Albert Stunker, a professor at University of Pennsylvania, he was a real pioneer in weight-related research and started studying diets as far back as the 50s. And we just haven't found diets as an effective method for controlling the size of our bodies. The number of failures far outweighs the number of successes. So I feel like just taking off the table the choice in how our bodies are and the amount of fat we have is probably the way we want to move forward scientifically, and just say, okay, given what we have, what things can we do to promote our well-being? What things are you interested in doing, right? Like from my perspective, this is about what you want to do to promote your health and well-being, instead of saying, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z because you have a body that looks like this, and therefore, I mean, because sometimes I feel like there's a lot of like, well, if you're in a larger body by nature, right? That's how the genetic cards fell. Then you have to eat this and only that, and not eat this. And but if you're in a small body and you were given, you know, the genetic, whatever you call it, you know, like lucky gene, you're in a small body, well, then you can eat whatever you want. You can have ice cream, you can have cake, you can, no, like none of that, in my view, is the way this really is used. Like, I don't think that's a useful way to think about it either. And again, all of this is based on just years and years of being in the research, doing my own research, running my own studies in both the quote unquote obesity field, right? And the eating disorders field, which is kind of the, you know, in my view, the mirror image of what happens when we focus on weight. We focus on weight, we get more eating disorders.
I think the only pushback I would have is being at 1.67 and 130 pounds. I would have taken any additional pounds I could pack on. So I think in some ways sports would be my only argument. Is I tried to put on fat because fat can turn to muscle, and I was trying to get any of it. I think about some of my friends that were football players, linemen.
Sure.
Exception to the rule.
I don't even know if I would see that as an exception, as more of just a functionality issue.
I wouldn't argue that. I think your point is incredibly well made. But I think some people here is like, then they feel stigma. What I don't want to have happen, and I don't hear you doing this, is, hey, maybe I want to be in a different body and getting help to want to do it. And this is where we get into tricky territory, right?
It is.
I mean, because we've had hours of discussions around the new Ozempic pill set. I don't want to feel anybody's shame for making that decision as well. I mean, it gets into really tricky ground as we try to talk about it in the best way possible, which I feel like I'm just tripping all over myself at this point. So
we all do. It's a very tricky space, and it's not anyone's place or my place. I should just speak for myself. It's not my place to judge how people want to deal with their health, right? And if somebody chooses to take a medication, or if somebody chooses to get surgery, that's not my place to
Right.
judge,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
People need to make these decisions in ways that are informed. I think what I care about is that people aren't being misled by, quote, science that says if you are in a larger body, you will die. And if you don't do something incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Just invasive to
Yeah.
fix that, then you will die. That's where I start to say, no, wait a second. Like, I think
Right.
I think some of the science
Great
might
point.
be a little skewed. And let's think about some of the reasons behind, or the incentives behind, why people are being told they should take medications that have a lot of side effects, or why they should be getting surgeries that are very dangerous, right? Is there some kind of financial incentive behind that? I think that's also very tricky, right?
Yes.
Who
Yes.
chooses to do those things? It's
Right.
not my place to judge, right?
Yeah.
That people need to make choices in the best in the best amount of information that, or the most valid information they can gather, and whatever their choice is their choice. I think
Yeah.
that's what it's really about.
Yeah. So far, BMI, even from the founder of BMI, and if you just want to hate BMI, go back and look at its history because it's not pretty. But even the founder said you're using it wrong. Uh, Basically, no scientific validity around this metric. So we've beaten it down pretty hard here. I know you've integrated heart rate variability into your research as well. So how can we start to think about, you've already kind of led us into this, like HRV. Now let's shift the spotlight over, and especially, and I know we're dancing on maybe some speculation here, some fun with the podcast, but as a replacement for this invalidated metric that is unfortunately in electronic medical records and everywhere else. How could we then start to integrate heart rate variability as a replacement metric?
So, I mean, I think it's complicated, as we've been saying, like the whole thing's complicated, but
Yes.
I think the first place to start is taking the BMI off the table, right?
Yeah.
Like that's where we start. So if we want to have fun and live in the world of like idealism,
Yeah.
yeah, the BMI just gets taken out of the
Yeah.
EMR, the electronic medical record, right? We don't have to stand on a scale
Right.
when we go to the doctor. However, I will tell you, there's a lot of medical professionals that say, hey, monitoring weight does have some value. And this is a caveat that I want to put in, because when you have heart failure, right? Like you really want to
Yeah.
make sure that you're not dealing with edema and
Right.
things that could make that could be evidence that your health is going south.
Right.
So there are places in medicine, and please, for anyone listening, don't think that I'm saying like, oh, we should never put our body on a scale ever again, because I think there are places in medicine where we need to,
Right.
right? It's it's the attachment of the body mass index to a specific health status that I contest, that particular metric, the BMI, is not attached to a health status. I'm not saying we need to toss out entirely the use of the scale for monitoring health markers
Yeah.
that are particularly existent in certain health conditions. So I just do want to like make that statement, because people could come up with a firestorm of reasons why what we're saying is just like way off, right?
Yeah.
Way
Great
off.
point.
So, however, we're in our ideal world, if we could take the BMI itself off of the medical record, I think that it would be very cool to have the person's sort of baseline HRV available in a way that, no, HRV, from my understanding, and I've only been studying it for a short time now in comparison to the 25 years I've been studying the BMI, I understand that HRV is very individual.
Mhm.
I understand that there aren't great norms. The standard deviations are enormous. So if we do talk about norms, the the person who's either above or below the norm for their gender and age is it doesn't really do us a lot of good to say, oh my gosh, I'm healthier than the norm, or
Right.
I'm not healthier than the norm. So I
Right.
think HRV has its own set of complexities, right?
Yeah.
However, from what I understand is that we can establish a baseline HRV at the individual level. If we were to do everyday regular monitoring,
Yeah.
or even like most days
Yeah.
regular monitoring, say we got people to take that 3-minute reading 3 to 4 times a week,
Right.
right? I mean, I would say, why not do it every day? It's
Yeah.
kind of
Why
cool
not?
to kind
Plan
of
your
see where
day.
you're at, right?
Yeah.
Like let's, in an ideal world, why not do it every day? But if we could get people
Yeah.
to do it most days, we can establish good 30-day averages, right?
Right.
And those averages, if we start to see a sort of like pretty significant decrease, may be a marker for something being wrong.
Yeah.
And to me, that's powerful,
Yeah.
because this is a non-specific indicator of nervous system functioning, right?
Mhm.
It's not just, are you stressed out in this moment, or
Right.
did you not get good sleep, or
Right.
have you, like overtrained, over exercised, or haven't you eaten in a way that's nourishing for a week and a half? Who knows, like you've been traveling or whatever.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that can throw this off, but it's also a good indicator of mortality. And
Yeah.
if we're seeing a a very significant sort of prolonged dip in HRV, maybe that's something that can help people understand, well, wait a second, maybe I need to see a doctor,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'm, like I'm sleeping, I'm doing all my other typical health engaging behaviors, or health promoting, sorry, health promoting behaviors, and yet my HRV seems to be, consistently for this last month, seems to be a lot lower than it's been.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe in my ideal world, maybe this could be a way to 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 screen for major health problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Or yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that early indicator of something's going on here. Like you said, talk to a medical provider to identify that, because it's not going to tell you exactly here's what's going on with you,
Right.
but it can give you that alert. And what I love about it too, as we beat down the BMI, is and I know that the terminology is changing, but the healthy at every size, really being healthy, right? That's what we're measuring here. So it's you could probably back yourself way into how HRV can be stigmatizing.
I
But
think
we got a ways to go before that happens yet.
we
Like, it's so
do.
new.
We can
Like,
stigmatize anything, right?
you can
Like that's
stigmatize anything. And
that's human
yeah,
nature.
as
We
we
do
say,
it.
you can look at population norms. The next thing you need to do is forget about the population norms and just look at your own, and then how do you feel? Because you're establishing, like you said, that own baseline. A 30 for you might feel great, whereas a 45 for me might be sick. That's
Exactly.
but it's that individualized piece of
It,
things. And then lifestyle changes, or you can measure these of, is this or is this not improving heart rate variability, hopefully without stigma and shame that we're so engrossed in, and with the previous conversation around the BMI.
exactly. I think really keeping it neutral. I mean, you're never going to
Yes.
neutralize fat. You're never going to
Yeah.
neutralize weight. It just,
Right.
it's too late, right?
Yeah.
We have media that has for decades upon decades said this is a body that
Yeah.
you should attain or like strive for. Can we get a similar, not a similar, can we get a neutral sort of metric
Yeah.
like the HRV to not take on
Yeah.
similar kinds of good bad attributes? I don't know. I don't know,
Yeah.
but if we need something, right? I think the HRV is about as neutral as it's going to get right now. Right? It's about as neutral as it's going to get. And because precision medicine has become such a sort of a buzzword, I feel like this could get sort of channeled that way because it's so individualized. It's so unique to a person's history, their life, their lived experience, that their HRV is a value that is only unique to them.
Right.
And the doctor could, the healthcare practitioner, whoever it is, could monitor that. It could even be a psychologist or a therapist to say,
Yeah.
hey, like, let's talk about this. Like, I've noticed it's really low this month. What could be going on? And maybe you need to see a physician, or maybe you need to see a therapist, or maybe you need to see someone about your nutrition, or somebody about, like, a physical therapist about the way your body's moving. Like, there's so many. This is about as interdisciplinary as a metric can get.
It really is, because you're coming from all that, and some of the dietitians, nutritionists I talk to about this, are fascinated with this conversation as well, because there are still foods that can create, for me, it's just down to inflammation versus anti-inflammatory. But really, like, how do we moderate, just like alcohol, as we've talked a lot about in this thing, another thing that can carry a lot of shame in it, addiction in it, those sort of things. We know what alcohol does to heart rate variability. It's not spectacular, and finding what works for Janell and what works for Matt, and then just having the data to say,
It's having data, right?
yeah,
Like, if you are a person that doesn't want to give up some kind of food group or alcohol or whatever it is in your life, and that should be okay, right? Like, that, like, no
yeah,
one is saying, oh, because this lowers your HRV, to alcohol, I'm talking, because this lowers your HRV, nobody should ever have a drink again, right?
right,
If that's not something that you want to do, that, like, no one should be judged for those decisions. And at the same time, so if you are noticing a significant decline in the HRV, and you weren't out drinking the night before, and you did get good sleep, and you
yeah,
aren't especially stressed because you've got something crazy going on at work, or you lost a loved one, or something is going on in your life, then again, maybe that's where we can drill down and say, let's figure out, like, maybe that's when the blood work gets done, and this gets done, and like,
right,
other kinds of tests, right? This is a
exactly,
really easy, low-hanging fruit
yeah.
that can help us monitor our holistic well-being. I mean, for me, I think what is really cool about measuring HRV is, because I do this. I mean, I don't know if I've said this previously on your podcast, but I've measured now, since doing the research in using the Optimal HRV app. I started measuring my HRV daily to see, is this a reasonable ask of the
Yeah.
participants in my study, right? I started doing HRV biofeedback on the app. I started measuring my HRV. And what I've noticed is, now I'm aware of the things that, beyond like lifestyle, the things that improve my HRV and the things that lower my HRV. And for me, as an extrovert, and this is totally individual, being with friends increases my HRV. So it's an encouragement, in my view, of a holistic health to be
Right.
with people. Like,
Yes.
don't stay behind your computer working 24/7 because your HRV will take a hit. You need to
Absolutely.
be with people, you need to socialize. And I saw that as, a very consistent sort of single subject design, that when I was with people, even after traveling, I mean, I saw it at our conference the other week. I mean, we know that trip, I mean, especially the way back, but we
Yeah.
know that trip was stressful. Like, I had multiple flight connections, and there were some maintenance issues on flights and delays and connections, and it was stressful. And
Yeah.
yeah, my HRV took a hit the first day, but then the second day I was with everybody. I didn't get much sleep. So normally sleep would lower the HRV, but my HRV was high for me.
Yeah.
And that to me is data.
Yes.
That's an indicator to me, like, how do you want to stay well? How do you
Yeah.
want to stay functioning? The other thing I love about the HRV, unlike the BMI, is that I can train it using another very low hanging fruit technique. I don't have to, okay, it is, I would say there is a barrier because you do need the app, and you do
Yeah.
need an app, right? You do need an app and a heart rate monitor.
Yeah.
These are very low cost, though. I
Mhm.
mean, like, if you think about the world of our expenses today,
Right.
$5 a month for an app, and $45 for a monitor, that, or maybe $50 for a monitor that lasts several years. That's as cheap as a decent bathroom scale, right?
Yeah.
I can train with those two tools. I can train through HRV biofeedback my HRV to be more resilient, to go up.
Absolutely.
And we've
Yeah.
got lots and lots and lots of years of studies that show that anybody can do that. And maybe I'm being a little, like, exaggerating in terms of anybody. Most people, right?
Mhm.
Most people. I mean, yes, there's people with certain limitations, medications, and maybe like people on pacemakers won't be able
Right.
to change their HRV. So I'm like, excluding some people for sure. But most people, way more people that can change than can change their weight,
Yeah.
right? Most
Exactly.
people can train their HRV to go up, and not reach an ideal. There's no ideal here,
Right.
but to go up, to be higher than it was 2 months ago before you started training your HRV, or even 6 months ago. Like, the it's not something that's inconceivable, in my view, to control with something as low hanging as biofeedback. So, like,
Yes.
taking lifestyle out of the equation, lifestyle
Yeah.
requires privilege, right? We
Right.
need money to buy nutritious food. We need time to exercise. We need we need time to sleep, right? Not
Right.
everybody has those
Has
privileges,
that.
but if we can get biofeedback into the hands of people, that's powerful. And it's a powerful way to use a weight inclusive framework, to use the language of academic health at every size. The weight inclusive approach can be to train people on HRV biofeedback as a way to holistically improve their well-being.
Love it. I don't know. I think we could talk about this for 2 more hours, but I think you wrapped it up on a great note there. Any final words? I know we'll put some links to the articles we've kind of talked about in the show notes, but
Yeah, I think
any final thoughts so we can just shovel the dirt on the BMI and say bye-bye now.
I think what's important, if any listeners are interested in sort of the replacement paradigm for the weight-centered paradigm, we'll provide some resources to talk about the ways that we can approach health, even aside from the BMI. I mean, Matt and I
Yeah.
are kind of having fun with this idea of, like, take the BMI out, you need a new metric. Why not HRV? Even aside from that, how can we shift our paradigm in healthcare away from the weight-centered paradigm, I've got several papers that talk about the, the disordered eating components that are, sort of embedded into the weight-centered paradigm, or not embedded into, but like consequences of, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I just check out some of those articles that we'll provide links to, and really just start questioning our assumptions, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what this is about. We need to really question our assumptions about our bodies and about the kind of control that people really have, because the data just aren't there. People, are given bodies by a lot of different factors. And this is not something that I think in healthcare we should be expecting people to automatically have the ability to change.
Love it. I love it. And I would just add for my 2 cents, be gentle with yourself around this. I continue to read. I continue to adapt my language. I feel like I've tripped over myself several times in this episode, so I apologize. I hope I have not offended anybody
And
with
I
this.
think everybody does.
It's a
All of
tough,
us.
it's a tough area internally because we've been so, since a young age, been given misinformation. Even we knew it was misinformation when we were given it. And then, it's an incredibly frustrating to look back, being almost 50 now, and what I was told even 10 years ago when we were talking about a book is, oh, wine's good for you. No, that was kind of BS at the time as well. Like, no, it's not. I mean, if it's safe for you, enjoy it, but it's not a health food.
It's
But we
not
were sold wine as a health food. It's not a health.
work.
Have a grape. Have one grape. It has all the benefits and none of the drawbacks as a glass of wine. So, be gentle with yourself. I just appreciate you, Janell, of being patient with me as I've asked the questions, because I think some of us don't feel like we have a Janell in our life to say, okay, I need to be vulnerable. I have these questions. I don't even know if I'm using the right words to do. So I would just be gentle with yourself, no matter where you're at in this conversation. And hopefully together we can chart a new path forward, because shaming people on, hey, they may use the O word, is not kind of helpful to bringing them over to this movement of just overall health. And that's where I'm really excited to work with you and our team to hopefully reset this conversation. I mean, it's going to take probably the rest of both of our lives and then some to do it, but we've got to at some point. Let's stop this, just the craziness right now of the BMI. Let's just stop. Like, no.
Sounds like a good place to start. Let's just stop.
All right. Well, my friend, I appreciate you as always. And I want to thank our listeners. Again, show notes, you can find those usually in the wherever you're listening to the podcast, but we'll also have all that at optimalhrv.com as well. Thanks for everybody listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.